Welcome back to the Green Lectionary Podcast, a conversation on Scripture through the lens of creation justice. My name is Derek Weston, and today we will be looking at a text for the third week of Advent. My guest today is Rabbi Yonatan Neril. Yonatan Neril founded and directs the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, which reveals the connection between religion and ecology and mobilizes faith communities to act on climate change. He authored the best-selling book Eco-Bible and the Ecological Commentary on the Hebrew Bible. He speaks internationally on religion and ecology, including at the World Economic Forum in Davos, multiple UN climate conferences, and the Parliament of World Religions. In December 2023, he initiated and co-organized the first ever Faith Pavilion at a UN climate conference, COP28 in Dubai, which included 70 sessions with 325 speakers. Yonatan has also co-organized 12 interfaith environmental conferences in the U.S. and Israel. Before we continue, a message from Creation Justice Ministries. Winter and Advent are seasons of stirring up strength. Even as the earth grows still, life below the surface is preparing for renewal. Far from dying, creation is quietly gathering strength for what's next. Advent invites us to do the same, to wait, to hope, and to stir up strength from our deepest and quietest places so that we are prepared for the light of Christ to break into the world. Creation Justice Ministries has been stirring up strength through gathering in public witness, training and forming faith leaders, bringing creation justice into church life, and supporting church resilience and restoration projects. Will you stir up your strength once more with a special year-end gift? Your donations received by December 31st will be matched dollar for dollar by a generous donor, doubling your impact for creation justice. Join us in stirring up our strength for the work that lies ahead. And join us now as we look at Isaiah 35 through the lens of creation justice. I am here with Rabbi Yonatan Neril. Yonatan, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. It's great to be here with you.
Where I first encountered your work was around Eco-Bible. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind telling our audience a little bit about that project and how it came to be, and what was your aim in creating the Eco-Bible series?
So I have read the Hebrew Bible, and in particular the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch from Genesis to Deuteronomy. I've read it through an ecological lens, and when I encountered the Hebrew Bible, I realized that there are deep teachings within, especially age-old Jewish commentaries that go back millennia in regards to ecological sustainability. So during my time in rabbinical seminary, I took notes of different texts and saw that major commentators like Maimonides and Rashi and rabbis from the Talmud said things that related to our current ecological challenges. And based on those notes, I compiled this commentary, Eco-Bible. Volume 1 is on Genesis and Exodus, and Volume 2 is on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
And one of the things that I have found so helpful is really just recognizing that for those of us who are, for those who are Jewish, for those who are Christian, that we don't have to look outside of our text, our shared text, to find a moral imperative to care for creation, to be worried about the ecological crisis that we find ourselves in. And I think the voices that you've collected in the voices that you've compiled in this collection just make that crystal clear, that our traditions really give us what we need to speak with moral authority on these topics.
Thank you. I mean, there's so much commentary, and many of the rabbis who were reading the Pentateuch over the millennia were themselves farmers, or they worked, as in villages living in pre-industrial, pre-modern economies. And so, for example, one of the preeminent commentaries, Rashi, was a vintner, and so he, during the day, he would be involved in growing grapes, and as a farmer, and then he would also have his rabbi duties. But he was able to, bring the two together, and so in his commentaries comes out a certain ecological perspective.
It's great It's really helpful. I'm wondering, do you find in Jewish communities, I feel like there's in Christian communities, the uphill battle that we often find is there are people who put their ecological concerns on one side, and their faith on another side, and they're not necessarily talking to each other. Like even if they are deeply engaged in their faith and deeply engaged in the ecological issues, those two sides of themselves, it's almost like they're bifurcated. And I'm wondering if that's an experience that you find in Jewish communities.
I have had that experience, and I think as you said, it's a common phenomenon, whether a person is Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or whatever religion they might affiliate with. And I think it's actually one of the root issues that relates to the ecological crisis, which is
Mm,
that within religion, there are deep ecological teachings. But for various reasons, humanity is not sufficiently accessing these teachings at this moment in history when I believe that God is calling on us to access these teachings in
mm,
order to present a sustainable future and sustainable present moment for the current and future generations. So, now why is that? That people are sort of siloed between their religious practice and the ecological, maybe they have an ecological side, and so they may like walking in nature, for example. I think part of it has to do with the fact that clergy, for the most part, are not frequently preaching about the ecological crisis. And so therefore, it's fairly rare for many congregants to hear in their house of worship, whether it's a synagogue or a church or a mosque, for them to hear from their rabbi, priest, or imam about these issues. I think that if they were to hear more often from their clergy member and from religious teachers and from religious leaders on this issue, then I think that this bifurcation would sort of evaporate, it would dissipate. Because people would realize, they would wake up, oh, I thought that my composting practice was, I'm just like a tree hugger and just sort of doing my thing in that regard. But then when the clergy member all of a sudden gives a sermon about the religious basis for not trashing our planet and for actually reducing one's waste stream by a significant amount by composting, well, wow, that's nice to see that a spiritual practice and an ecological practice go hand in hand. In
mm,
English, there's no word to describe this phenomenon of doing something like, for example, not wasting food in the
mm,
Jewish tradition is a spiritual practice. It's one of what's called the 613 commandments, and it's also an ecological practice.
mm.
And so, but I believe that there's something deep of where a person is doing something both religious and ecological at the same time, and the two, go hand in hand with each other.
Hmm. Yeah. And obviously that's why we're here, is that we believe you are one of those people who has helped convince me and many others the importance of preaching on these issues. So again, I just so appreciate the work that you have done with Eco Bible, and the ways that you have been so vocal and diligent about this work of keeping these issues in front of people of faith, has just been really important for our work at Creation Justice Ministry. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So our text today, this text for the third Sunday of Advent, comes from Isaiah 35, verses 1 to 10. And I'll go ahead and read that for us. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and shouting. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. And then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be opened. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For water shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp, the grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fool, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So, where is creation in this passage?
Well, it seems to be everywhere. I mean, it's quite an amazing passage from the prophet Isaiah. And, I'll just read the first line in Hebrew.
Mm,
Yesusum midbar v'tziyah v'tagel arava v'tifrach k'chavatzalet.
mm,
And, one of the things that's interesting about the Hebrew language is that there are many different verbs for rejoicing or being joyous. And so one of the words that's used here is v'tagel, uh, uh, which there's a Hebrew name Gila, which is
mm,
related to that, and it's in this word also contains within it the word gal, with a wave, like a wave of joy is
mm,
overcoming a person. But in this case, who is rejoicing? It's the wilderness, the Arava, and it will blossom like a rose. And so, this chapter begins with this idea that the desert, which is normally a place of aridness and lack of abundant flora and fauna, is actually going to blossom like a rose. And then the next verse, it'll blossom abundantly, and it will exult and shout, and it will receive the glory of Lebanon. So now the prophet is comparing the desert to Lebanon, and so for those who aren't deeply familiar with the geography of this land, the Lebanon receives much more water than the desert, and so there's just a lot more life in terms of forests and trees and plant and animal life in the Lebanon, which is a totally different climate than the Arava, which happens to be much of the Middle East is desert. But what the prophet is talking about is a time where the desert blossoms, which
mm,
is actually interesting because I recently learned that Saudi Arabia used to be a much more fertile and green area
mm,
than it is today, about 10,000 years ago. And it's gone through different phases of being green and then desert, sort of based on the tilt of the earth
mm.
and the way that the monsoon rains come from the Indian Ocean. And so it might seem to us like a strange idea to have the desert blooming,
Mm,
but actually there are times that even the Sahara at one point was green.
mm. Yeah, that's such a great that's such a great image, and it's such a great reminder that these circumstances can change. That's a lot of what this text is kind of sharing with us, is that these circumstances, these desert circumstances, can change. But there's also, I think, where you started is just also so helpful, because it's giving agency to the land, that the rejoicing, the joy of the land, it just feels like agency that we don't often give to the land. We don't often talk about the land as rejoicing. We don't talk about the land as suffering. We don't talk about the land as having its own relationship with God. And here the text is very clear that the relationship, the land has its own relationship with God. And the land is excited to see the glory of the Lord, which is something that I think is just a really beautiful image.
Yeah, I thanks for pointing that out. It's really an important thing, which is sometimes overlooked in the Judeo-Christian tradition, that the land is active. The land is it's
Mm,
the earth isn't just some, passive uh, you know, uh, mine to be extracted from, and to just, for us to just take whatever we can, whether it's trees or minerals or fish or animals. But no, the earth itself, the land rejoices here. And there's a Jewish teaching that relates to this, which is about the generation of Noah, when
mm,
which is the only time in the Bible where God destroys all life on earth except for that which was in the ark, and aside from the sea life. And the question is, what happens, and the Zohar, the mystical Jewish text, teaches that when people are doing the will of God and are living in resonance with the will of God and have, societies of justice and compassion, then the earth is happy, and the immanent presence of God, which in Hebrew is called the Shekhinah,
mm,
the feminine presence of God, then that envelops the earth.
mm,
However, when people are doing the opposite, which is what caused God to destroy the generation of Noah, then this immanent presence of God departs and essentially goes into exile and leaves uh, from the earth. It's like divorced from the earth,
mm,
and then there's the destruction that came. So, there's definitely something deep to think about in terms of what is our relationship with the earth, and is the earth rejoicing based on how we are living with it? The psalmist in the book of Psalms talks about the trees singing. In
mhm,
Hebrew, the verse is Az yiranenu kol atzei hayar lifnei Hashem. Then the trees of the field, of the forest, will sing
mm,
before God. And so this idea that based on human actions, the trees sing and
mm,
the earth sings and rejoices, and that we can bring out that song and that rejoicing through our righteous actions.
mm. I think, wow, that's such a powerful image and idea. The idea that our actions can bring out the singing of creation. I mean, that in and of itself is just such a powerful statement. And that's that's you think about the ways that we when we think about the ways that we interact with people in our lives that we love, and we want to see the joy come out of them. We want to see the smile on their faces. We want to hear the laughter in their voices. And to think of our relationship with creation in such a way where we would want to see the joy, you know, the smile, if you will, on creation's face, the laughter in creation's voice, the song in creation's heart. Um, what a powerful what a powerful image that is. That's something that I think is just incredibly compelling. Um,
Yeah, and it's something that indigenous people, I think,
mm,
are attuned to. Just last week, the UN climate conference finished in the city of Belém, in the north of Brazil, next to the Amazon. And one thing that scientists who study indigenous people have found is that the rainforest, it's not just like a random rainforest. The Amazon rainforest and other rainforests in the world actually exist because of the tending and care and relationship that
mm,
human beings have with the rainforest.
mm,
And the opposite is true, is that when we cut down the trees and replace the rainforests with soybean farms and cattle ranches, then the rainforest doesn't exist. So it really nature and people are in a symbiotic relationship.
Mm.
And that's something that indigenous people have figured out, and I think that that people from the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, that we need to recover.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. Um, one other place where creation kind of shows up in this passage for me in a way that I have a question about. Um, and I'm curious more than anything, so I want to ask you this question. In verse 9, it says, "No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it." And just a couple of weeks ago in Advent, or I guess maybe it was just last week for Advent, we have Isaiah 11, the idea of the lion laying with the lamb and the bear eating grass. And so this feels like a pretty big shift from that one kind of predator and prey kind of being in relationship together to hear this move to no predators at all. And I'm wondering how you read that, how you read that verse and how you understand that verse.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I think we need to keep in mind that the prophet Isaiah lived in the 8th century
Mm,
BCE. So he lived almost 3,000 years ago. And this was during the reigns of the kings Uzziah and Jotham and Ahaz and Hezekiah. So about 3,000 years ago, in the area around Jerusalem, there were, if you left the town of Jerusalem, because in that times it probably had about 10 or 15,000 people. So it's, in our times it's a small town.
mm,
Uh, if you left there and went to another city or another town, really, then you might encounter a lion.
mm.
So, so from this perspective, that there will be no lions. Well, what he's really saying is, okay, you can go for a walk outside without the potential of you and your family members, especially your children, getting eaten by a lion.
Mm,
That's I think that what's really motivating this here. I don't think it's the prophet Isaiah, and if you look at his other teachings, he's not anti-nature.
mhm.
And I think to read it that way, would be to misunderstand it here. But I think this idea is just that, you know, you're going to be able to be safe.
Yeah.
Um, and because he's talking about what's in Hebrew called a maslul vaderech, which is like a path, a road,
Mm,
although in their times, it was a unpaved road that you'll be able to walk safely on this road.
mhm.
Um, I think that's really the essential point. And it's interesting because the Asiatic lion is now extinct
Mm,
in this part of the Middle East,
hmm,
as is the cheetah and as is the hippopotamus. There were many species of animals that used to live in this region. The Syrian bear, the last Syrian bear was killed about 100 years ago.
hmm,
So, the Middle East used to have animals that now we only think of in terms of safaris in Africa.
mhm.
But over time, as the human population grew, the animal population declined. And I was recently at a conference where I spoke with Sylvia Earle, the oceanographer, and she talked about how humans are one of 10 million species on Earth that God has created. And yet we have now appropriated half of the land area of Earth for human uses. So, just
Mm,
to give you a sense of the scale of our impact.
mm, mm. And thank you for going there because I think um, that's really important that we understand that this is not um, this is not a passage that is against these creatures, right? And so often I think we've taken our notion of dominion And we've taken that to the elimination of creatures. And so when you have a verse like this that says, "No lion shall be there," and we're saying that for human safety, it almost feels like there's a reading that could be there's a blank check there to like eliminate a species that would be harmful to us. But that's not like that doesn't reinforce that doesn't go along with like the overall themes of what Isaiah is trying to say. This is about safety. This is about being able to go from one place to another, and again, this being a lot of this being because of the presence of the Lord, because of the presence of God, that this safety exists, not because of the purging of creation.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think so. And and I think if some of these prophets were to be living today, they would they would want to see the animals that they knew in
mhm.
their time, and they would say, well, where are all the animals?
Yeah,
Which is also, we need to
yeah.
keep in mind that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, when God says to the first human being, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and conquer it and dominate the animals and the birds, etc. Well, God is speaking to the first human being, to
Mm,
Adam and Eve, and which at that point, actually, according to one understanding, were one person, male side and a female side. Before in chapter 2, God makes two human beings, or takes Eve from Adam's side. But that, that original message, it was given to two human beings who were facing a planet Earth that had all these animals that were
mm,
threatening to them.
mm,
Um, but in our times, when we have 8.3 billion people, and of where lions and tigers and bears are not threatening to most people, the obligation is actually for us to conserve those species, which
mm.
is really the message of Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, that God placed the human being in the Garden of Eden to serve it and to conserve it.
Yeah, yeah. That's so good. So based off of where we see creation in Isaiah 35, um, what do you see as the sort of right response to humans to the non-human creation based off of Isaiah 35?
Well, I mean, I think, there's another aspect that we also should
Mm,
at least talk about briefly, which is, in addition to the many animal species that are mentioned, including deer, the verse also talks about the desert, blossoming like a rose,
mhm,
and that because of water,
mm,
that there being abundant water, which is, in verse 6, that for waters shall burst forth in the desert, streams in the wilderness. Torrid earth shall become a pool, harsh land, fountains of water. And so this water theme is also, really important theme,
mm,
uh, because what's actually happening in our times is that the opposite is happening. And I'm here in Jerusalem and here in the Middle East, of where we're seeing before our eyes the world becoming drier.
mhm.
Just last week, Iran got the first rain in many months, and their
Mm.
government was saying that they would have to evacuate the city of Tehran with 10 million people because there was simply no water to provide
Wow.
to the people. And
Wow.
and similar for other cities in Iran, and also Kabul in Afghanistan, a city of 6 million people, also is facing very acute water challenges. So, so the emphasis in this chapter in Isaiah on desert becoming fruitful because of the water, that's also something we need to connect to in our
Mm,
times when many people are suffering from lack of water.
mm, mhm. I think that's something that for our listeners here in the United States, I think that's maybe something that's really easy to take for granted. Although there are places in the United States that are, talk about places like Arizona that very quickly could be dealing with very similar kinds of issues. But I think it's really easy to take the access to water for granted. Um, and again, that's one of the things that separates us from the biblical text in some ways is that access to water wasn't always something that could be taken for granted. It wasn't something that could always be assumed. And the idea of, in some ways, God showing up through water, God's presence being known through water that comes over this dry land, comes over this desert land, something that we should be paying a lot of attention to for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, and actually last week I was in the desert and I walked in a stream bed where there was a little bit of water. It wasn't like the Mississippi River,
Mhm.
but it's amazing how in this desert environment, even a little bit of water provides life
Mm,
to palm trees and to acacia trees. Some people think that the desert is totally devoid of life, but actually there's life in the desert. It's just that in the summer it comes out at night because it's too hot to come out during the
mm,
day. In English, the word it's called the Dead Sea,
mhm,
but in Hebrew, it's called the Salt Sea
mm,
because it's actually not dead. The scientists have found that there's algae that lives on the surface of it, and that there are oases that grow on the shore, and there's a lot of flora and fauna. The Romans actually called it Mar Asphaltus, the asphalt sea, because there were
mm.
seepages of bitumen, a fossil fuel, from it. But
Hmm.
they didn't actually extract that. But there were other places in the world with seepages of bitumen, like in Azerbaijan and Burma, that have developed, fossil fuels or extracted fossil fuels based on those seepages.
Mm. That's um yeah, that's so interesting to me. I think that's so fascinating. Um, so where, as we look at this, for those of us, for Christians, for Jews, for Muslims who care about God's creation, as we look at Isaiah 35, where is there a call to action for us?
Well, I think if you look at the last verse in verse 10, where it says, "V'simchat olam al rosham," the crowned with joy everlasting, sason v'simcha yasigu, they shall attain joy and gladness, vanusu yagon vanacha, while sorrow and sighing flee. In this verse, you have another two languages of joy. One is called sason and simcha, uh, which in the Hebrew language there are many words for joy and there are
Mm,
many words for song. Different languages have many words for different things. Uh, so and this is I think part of the ecological linkage too, which is that it's been about 60 years now since the environmental movement emerged in the early 1960s with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And one of the challenges that the ecological movement has is sort of being doomsdayer
mm,
and not carrying this work from a place of joy.
mm,
And I think that one of the religious messages here is that we can achieve a joyful planet. We can
mm,
live in a joyful planet, and we can do this work joyfully. We can have
mhm,
fun doing it. We can enjoy our you know fellow companions on this path. And it doesn't have to be a burden, because most people don't want to hear doom and gloom.
yeah.
And so that's really the challenge for us. That's really the takeaway is how can this religious ecological message be carried from a place of joy and gladness and with God's help, so that the next generation and the current generation inherit a thriving, sustainable, and spiritually aware planet.
Mm. That's so, that is such a Um, one of the things that I think we've been fighting in our work, especially this year, if we just be very honest, particularly in this year, which has been a just really challenging year, has been to just look at the state of the world, to look at the state of our ecological crisis, and feel really overwhelmed, feel really sad, to really feel that sense that the clock is ticking and we're running out of time. And it is it's more about dread. It's more about fear. It's more about like you said, more about sort of the doomsdayism. The encouragement to do this work with joy, and to do this work for the joy of the earth, for the joy of the planet, I think is absolutely maybe one of the most critical things we could hear right now. Because you're right, like no one wants to hear, or we've all heard the doomsday message, and in some ways it doesn't resonate, and sometimes it can have the opposite effect of making us move to inaction. But to think about doing this work with joy, inviting others to do this work with joy, so that we can experience the joy of the land, so that we can experience a joyful planet. That's a beautiful invitation. And I think one that's far more compelling than the invitation that we often give to people.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you a bonus question, because I have you here, and I want to. I feel like this is an important question to ask. So this is a Hebrew text that Christians around the world will be reading for Advent. One of the things that I really love to talk about with my Jewish friends is the ways that Christians read Hebrew scripture. And so I just wanna maybe ask you and invite you, as someone who, you have referenced the Hebrew of this text repeatedly, the language, the linguistics of this text repeatedly. Um, what um, how do you encourage Christians to read these Hebrew texts in a way that is honoring to their Jewish origins, and in a way that is respectful of their Jewish origins, recognizing we share them, but also recognizing that there is a place from which they come, and that there's a little bit of respect to sort of the original audience, original language, those sorts of things. So, is there anything that you feel would be helpful for Christians to hear in terms of thinking about how we read the Hebrew Scripture?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's been I was at just an event last week here in Jerusalem at the Catholic Notre Dame Center here about the 60th anniversary of the Catholic document Nostra Aetate, which was a Catholic document that sort of reoriented Catholic theology in relation to Jews and people of many religions. And that was a welcome reorientation. And based on that, there's been a real different relationship between Christians and Jews that has emerged in the past 60 years. And with several popes referring to Jews as the elder brother. And I've had the good fortune of, for example, collaborating with Reverend Dr. Leah Shade on the Eco Preacher resource for Christian pastors and priests, which is based in part on Eco Bible and the Hebrew readings there. because about 50% of the Revised Common Lectionary it comes from the Hebrew Bible, whether it's the Psalms. And so therefore, it's amazing to me that half of the Christian readings at church are from the Hebrew Bible, and some pastors are now seeking engagement with Jewish texts and Jewish commentaries on this, because there happens to be this wealth of thousands of years of Jewish commentary, and that's part of what Eco Bible is about. Judaism's a non-proselytizing religion, so we're not trying to get Christians to become Jewish, but there does happen to be this wellspring of Jewish wisdom from the millennia that can help us in our current ecological crisis, and so therefore, it's very heartening for me when I see Christian clergy and lay leaders engaging with Jewish commentaries on this, because at the end of the day, it's just wisdom that if it resonates with people, then great, and if it can help people to connect to the text, then what a wonderful thing.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel like that's a really generous perspective, and I'm so grateful for the work that you have done with Leah Shade. I'm so grateful for the work that you have done. Again, I feel like you have been such an invitational voice in this space, creating dialogue, creating conversation, and so I'm just really grateful that you took the time to be with us today for this conversation and engage with us on this passage that a lot of us will be reading for Advent. So thank you so much for being a part of the Green Lectionary.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Great to be with you.
Thank you for joining us for the Green Lectionary podcast. This episode was produced by Sprocket Wagner, and the music was provided by Christian McIver. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Instagram at @green_lectionary. You can support this and other programs of Creation Justice Ministries at creationjustice.org/donate.
Our story comes alive within these pages, for every time and place throughout the ages. God speaks and is heard, and the enduring word calls us to care for our world as we share the love that can set creation free. Restoring the earth to wholeness, peace, and harmony. Let the songs of the water, land, and sky resound, 'cause together we're all bound. Within these pages, there's always new life to be found.